We actually had, I think, a great product. There were customers that really loved it, but there's just so many things that we just didn't focus on or were distracted by that just weren't the right way to go and grow the business. Even in these deep, dark moments, there was still that core base motivation because it was this is the thing that I meant to work on for life. We are just in the early innings of seeing how some of these technologies can actually impact the workflows of companies that do things in the real world.
Welcome to Trailblazers, the podcast where we sit down with contrarian tech leaders who found conventional success in unconventional ways. Today on the show, I am so excited to be joined by Delian Asparouhov. Delian is a partner at Founders Fund and the president and co-founder of Varda Space Industries, one of the most ambitious companies redefining what's possible in space and manufacturing. Varda is pioneering the orbital economy by producing pharmaceuticals and advanced materials in microgravity, unlocking breakthroughs that simply can't be achieved on Earth. Before co-founding Varda, Delian earned a Thiel Fellowship while still an undergraduate, leaving MIT to move to Silicon Valley and build at the frontier of technology. Since then, he's become a leading voice at the intersection of startups, deep tech, and national ambition. I love that last part, national ambition. That's pretty good.
I don't know if I came up with this or who came up with the bio, but I like it so far.
Yeah, it's going good.
Yeah.
Beyond venture and space manufacturing, Delian is also the co-creator of the Hill and Valley Forum, which brings together leaders from Washington and Silicon Valley to strengthen collaboration around technology, defense, and national security. Born abroad and raised in Salt Lake City, Delian's journey from a young coder obsessed with space to backing and building category-defining companies has been anything but conventional. Driven by intellectual curiosity and an appetite for hard problems, he's helping shape the future of both industry and exploration. Let's welcome Delian.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for being here. That's quite a bio.
That is the bio. Did AI make that? Did you make that? Did my EA?
I think your EA sent it.
Oh, wow. Okay,
yeah.
Very cool.
I usually get pinged when we make it, which is very rare. With the last guest we had, we did actually make it, and he was like, "Oh, I'm going to use that."
Yeah. Well, that's a good bio.
But no, that came from
Credit
you.
to my EA. She's great.
Yeah, she is great, actually. Yeah. I like her a lot. Well, I'm excited to have you here. There's a lot of fun stuff we can talk about. But let's just dive into our icebreaker question that we start every podcast with. This is very different than conventional interviewing wisdom where you sort of ease into a conversation. We like to start with the hard stuff.
Cool.
So, which I feel like you'll appreciate. So I want to know what has been the hardest part of your journey so far. It could be personal, it could be professional. You can take us back to your MIT days. But throughout this whole journey so far, if you have to really think about that moment that almost broke you, what was it?
There's sort of two moments, and I think the difference between the two moments is kind of a useful life lesson or something that I reflect on sort of a lot. In my first company that I started basically straight out of school, so I dropped out of MIT to basically start a company in the enterprise healthcare space. It was this tool for behavioral and speech therapists for use in autism therapy. And then maybe about 2.5 years into the business, we had one of our very first anchor customers basically sort of churn out of the product and switch to a competitor. And they did it for reasonable reasons. We basically had tried to really go, they were a more SMB mid-market clinic. We tried to shift the product to go much higher up in the enterprise to try and close some bigger contracts. Those contracts ended up coming through, but then because we were so focused on this larger enterprise use case, we weren't really focused on the use case of the people that were actually paying for us, which was obviously probably a silly thing to do, but at the time we thought it made sense.
It's very common though. Very common to move up to enterprise and lose track of the early people.
Exactly. Yeah. And that customer churned out, and it just sent me into this sort of deep spiral of just oh my God, we sort of gambled on this enterprise thing. The SMB thing is now not working. This first customer churn, they were such a significant part of basically our revenue, but they were also sort of the person that introduced us to a bunch of other customers, and so this is going to lead to a really bad reputation in the market. And I just got stuck into this cycle of despair where rather than sort of getting up and trying to solve the problem, I sort of became very, I don't know, depressed, low agency, didn't really sort of want to try to solve it, and the company basically steadily petered out from there. Where we still kept some sort of core user base and sort of customers and revenue, but at some point it just stopped growing basically after that sort of customer churned out, and I just got really demotivated to work on it, and so it definitely broke me in that. I had been put up on this pedestal from the sort of Thiel Fellowship. Thought there was going to be some level of sort of guaranteed success. Again, got to something where people were paying us revenue, they were using it, et cetera, but lost this customer. And so I always really sort of sat with that moment where anytime that I considered starting anything else in the future, I would think back on that moment and think man, if that's what happens to me when the going gets tough, am I really that well suited to go build something sort of again? Maybe I should be considering sort of other paths or roles in life that are a little bit less extreme upswings and downswings since I don't handle the swings as much. And so it was a little bit of what led me into like the world of investing, and that like, in some ways by just having a distributed portfolio, it's a little bit easier to not have as much up and down, basically, sort of swings, both emotionally, financially, et cetera. I obviously, ended up still deciding to start another company. I started Varda. And about 2.5, 3 years into the business, shortly after we launched our first vehicle up into orbit, so June 2023, launch W1, first ever basically demonstration vehicle. We had a path to bring that vehicle back down about sort of 2-3 months later. We had set it up with regulators, our launch range. Basically, like from the day that we started the company, we had been like marching towards ideally landing in September of 2023. And about 3 days before the landing, we basically got a call from the range officer of the military range that we're planning on landing at. They basically just pulled out all the stops. He said, just don't like the way you guys are handling this operation. Not sure quite what's going on, but I feel like something's getting pulled on this. It's like a fast one on me. And like, I just don't want you guys on my range. I don't want you landing here. I never want to speak to you again. And you need to find somewhere else to land your vehicle. And I remember in that moment, I was just like, oh my God. This is the equivalent of the customer churn from the first,
it's happening again.
It's happening again. Like, here it is, the depths of it. And I admit my reaction at first was the exact same. I just went into this depressive spiral, disassociated. I was like, I don't know how to possibly solve this. This seems impossible. Like, the entire company is predicated on the ability to bring things back. This person is basically the only place where I can bring something back in the United States. We just have sort of no path forward. And so I admit for 4 or 5 days after that, I don't think I basically got out of bed. I didn't go on any meetings, phone calls. I just refused to engage with the outside world. And then there's something different this time around where 5 days in, I kind of realized, I was like, man, I can't believe we've raised all this money and it's not going to work. And then I was like, what am I going to do with my life, after this? And then I was like, well, I only have ever really had one idea, which is around, sort of the industrialization of, sort of in-space manufacturing. And so if this doesn't work, I'll probably just try to do it again. And then I kind of sat there and chewed on that idea for an hour. And then I was like, well, if I'm just going to do it again, I might as well just do it now and just get back to work on this one, since this is the one that has the funding and has a vehicle up in orbit, et cetera. And then I still remember I woke up the next day just super energized and ready to tackle it. And I was just like, well, this is the life's work. This is the thing. I don't have any other option other than figuring it out. I don't have any plan. There isn't even a plan for a plan, but let's start putting together a plan for a plan. Do we land it elsewhere? Do we try and reverse this guy's decision? Do we try and figure out how to swap this guy's job out and get somebody else into his job? Just what are all the possible angles of attack? And so we ended up executing on a whole variety of these things. We managed to get the vehicle back, basically, into that military range. We ended up, figuring out basically international places that we can land. We now have a significant partnership with Australia, and all of that basically came together from that sort of deep, sort of dark moment. And so I think, in some ways, those were the two moments that broke me the most. They both broke me, but I think the thing that I always found interesting and that I reflect on is the second time around, I sort of picked myself back up. And I think it's what sort of showed to me that this was the thing that I was meant to work on, sort of for life, was that even in these deep, dark moments, there was still that core base motivation, because it was this is the thing that I'm meant to work on for life. And so I'm allowed to have the core, sort of deep, dark moments, but at the end of the day, I'm not going to just let myself wallow in that for 6 months on end. It's just time to pick up and figure out what are the, sort of next steps forward. So.
Wow, that's wild. Well, I'm glad you figured it out. I mean, it makes sense considering Varda's still around.
Yeah.
So, we did know the ending there. We know
Correct.
that you did figure it out. Yeah, that's extremely tough. And it sounds like, am I hearing this right, that the takeaway is work on the thing that feels like your life's mission so that you can pull yourself out, because there will inevitably be those moments? Or is it that you had maybe matured a little bit and had figured out yourself a little better and knew how to pull yourself out? What's the takeaway there?
I think it's a bit of both, but it is this strong filter now for only work on or build things that you think are basically the sort of life's work, basically. And so I think I take that approach to all aspects of life now, where it's just I only want to be investing into things that I think are going to compound for the rest of life, that I know will be there, sort of, and be proud of them on my sort of deathbed, basically. And so and I think early on the motivations on the first company were not that. It was not something that I was that deeply proud to work on. I don't think that it's something that I'm sure on my deathbed I probably will forget the name of the company, even of the sort of first one. I won't think about it that much. And a part of it was it wasn't a problem space I was that emotionally attached to. It wasn't a thing that I cared that much about. I was doing it for the sake of doing it, because I was man, I just want to leave MIT. I want to start a startup. This is kind of the best idea I've got. But it was more because I wanted to start a startup, not because I was so deeply passionate about this field.
And I think this is a lot of founders, is that first idea is tied to someone they know or something they think they should do, but it's not really like that decade plus commitment, which we know if you're going to raise venture, like you need to have that. And when you're so young, I see this a lot with like younger founders. It's not the first idea, it's not the second, it's like the third or the fourth that becomes their Varda, you know?
Totally. And I think in some ways I'm very grateful for it in that that experience just taught me a ton about fundraising, sales, how to manage a team, what I'm good at and bad at. Like the reason that I'm not the CEO of Varda is like because I learned that like, hey, that day after we got like the military range officer call, like I did need those 4 or 5 days to kind of like disconnect and like, go through depressive spiral. Turns out like I'm probably not the person you want in front of all hands, like, the day after a crisis, because it's like I'm going to make everybody else. Yeah, I don't show up, or I'm going to make everybody else go deeper into a crisis rather than not. Versus like my co-founder, who is the CEO of Varda, was like ready the next morning at 9 a.m. and like was putting together the plan. I think a bit of it was just like watching the rest of the team and being like, wait, everybody else is putting together a plan and reacting like, what the hell am I doing? Like just sitting here in bed, like I got to go like, help the team out basically. And so I do think I find it valuable and that like, yeah, like I think it is, never say never, but I think it's like highly unlikely that like I ever end up as the CEO of anything that I work on, basically for the rest of my life.
Yeah, you know yourself well.
Yeah, I learned definitely a lot from that first experience.
Speaking of knowing yourself well, when you have moments where things go haywire, how do you pull yourself out of it? Because this is like you're giving me the two extremes. Everyone knows that as a founder, it's like up and down every day. So there's a lot of micro moments of like, oh shit, this is going south. Are there things that you do to pull yourself out of it? Other than reminding yourself it's your life's mission? Is it, connecting with a spouse? Is it meditation? Is it talking to a customer? Like, are there things that you can do? And I'm asking this for advice for founders who may feel like they're in that moment. What's your advice for them to pull yourself out when you do feel depressed and overwhelmed at things going wrong?
Yeah, I think it's like probably with some level of like maturity, network, et cetera, I can just sort of look at any problem and know how to break it down and figure out how to like create a plan to actually go tackle it. Where it's like, I think about the first company, there's so many things that I would do so differently now where it's like, we actually had, I think, a great product. There were customers that really loved it. But there's just so many things that we didn't focus on or were distracted by that just weren't the right way to go and grow the business. Like one example that I always like to think of is like we spent literally $0 on marketing, for that business, even though we had a really strong SMB user base that in some ways is like closer to like a prosumer where like they were spending like call it like $500, $1,000, $1,500 basically, bucks like a month on us. And our distribution mechanism for getting in front of new customers was always to go to these like really big enterprise conferences basically and talk to people with the booths. Turns out the clinics that had the booths were not the SMB prosumer types. They were like the super huge enterprises. And so that's how we got caught in this wrong loop where we're like, well, all the customers we're meeting are big enterprise customers, therefore that's who we should sell to. Instead, it just is easy to flip it on its head and just say, hey, the people that love the product are these people. How do I find more people like that? This is the exact type of group that loves to list their basically occupation, autism therapist, in their Facebook profile. 100%, I should have been spending $1,000 a month on just Facebook ads to autism therapists in XYZ size range and advertise the product to them. And I guarantee you I would have gotten way more customers and inbound, et cetera, than my once a month conferences that I was basically going to. And so I think a bit of it is, when I hit these moments of, sort of despair or difficulty, I think just from, especially in some ways from the investing side, I just seen so many businesses operate and tackle so many different problems that it's a lot easier to look at a problem and see, ooh, this looks and smells like XYZ other problem. And let me think through what are all the avenues of attack that are available for me? How do I go after this? And break it down into a basically step-by-step plan rather than it's very easy to get again in that moment with Varda, it's very easy to get overwhelmed by the idea of oh my God, our satellite is trapped in orbit. We have no path forward to bring it basically back down, and the one person that is allowed to tell us that we can bring it down is saying no. So it's easy to be well, I'm overwhelmed, I don't know what to do here. And instead it's no, we broke it down into okay, let's start back from it lands one day. Well, how does it land? Well, it either landed in this place or it landed in another place. So maybe one thing is find other places. Okay, if it landed in the place that we're currently trying to land it in, it means this guy said yes. Well, then why did he say yes? Well, who is his boss? How would his boss force him to say yes? Or this person is out of a job and somebody else came in and we convinced the new person to say yes. Well, how does this person get fired so that we can rotate somebody else new in, right? And it's you just start to break down.
Step by step.
Yeah, it's step by step. And in some of these things it sounds absurd, but eventually you start to realize, okay, well, how would his boss overrule him? And then it's okay, well, we would have to go talk to eventually this person reports into the Secretary of the Air Force. And so it's eventually you can go talk to that person. And so yeah, lo and behold, 4 days after the phone call, we were on the phone with the Secretary of the Air Force's like office because like we made that a priority and started to figure out, okay, like how do we plead our case such that like, there is somebody from like the top that can like overrule. Versus I think a younger version of me would have looked at this and been like, this is such a like insane problem to have. I have no idea even like how to like sort of begin to break this down. And so, yeah, it's probably just like, break it down into what feel like more step-by-step tangible, sort of steps. And it's a lot easier than like tackle a big problem. And if you like focus on the big problem too much, that gets scary. If you focus on just like, what can I do in like the next 2 days to march this forward? And for what it's worth, it took us, it was like September 5th was when we were supposed to land. We didn't land until February 14th the following year. So it was like September, October, November, December, January, February. It was like basically 6 months.
Painful.
Of time. That was super painful.
Yeah.
But it was like week by week, we did steadily eke out a bit more progress.
Yeah. And I love this anecdote too, that you had seen so much as an investor that you could say, oh, this kind of smells and reminds me like this other thing. What's your take on this, like, investor and founder dual role? I feel like you're one of the few people who's really doing both. I know you're not a day-to-day CEO with Varda, but you definitely have like your gig at Founders Fund and then you have your gig with Varda. Do you feel like more people should be in the investor-founder dual role? And then I have a couple other questions on that, but talk to me a little bit about how that came to be and if you think more folks should have that, because you get the reps plus the operating experience.
Yeah, I mean, the way that it came to be was, started at Founders Fund in like 2019. I came into it telling them like, hey, I do have a ton of passion around like aerospace and like want to, sort of invest more there. There's a couple theses that I'm interested in. I kind of flagged that in-space manufacturing was one of those. Originally started as an investment thesis, so I spent like Q4 of that year, 2019, and then Q1 the following year, 2020, going and meeting all the various management teams that had been working in this field on this idea, some of which had raised venture funding, even in the past. One of those even like brought into like, basically a couple of like, my partners to meet and like, really seriously assess whether or not we should invest like $10 million into the company. And after about 6 months, it sort of came to the realization that nobody was quite at like the quality bar of something that we would need to fund for a variety of reasons. Some of it was that like, early founders that had churned out. And so it was now professional CEOs that were operating the business. Some amount of it was like a lot of these groups like only wanted to operate within the confines of the International Space Station and NASA funding. And we fundamentally felt that like the only way to commercialize this was you had to go fully independent, basically like private infrastructure, both, on the rocket side of things from like a Falcon 9, but also operate entirely independent, basically like, sort of satellites and reentry pods rather than government funded ones. And so it came to this realization there was nobody was going to really work on it. And so ultimately realized like, man, if nobody else is going to do this, might have to be that like I need to go do this. And at the end of Q1 20, obviously COVID hit and we decided to like slow down a bit of like the deployment pace at Founders Fund. And so I had a lot more free time on my hands. So I just had this moment where I was like, we're not investing that much. I have this thesis that I'm deeply passionate about and have a ton of conviction in, but can't find anybody to work on. And so I just had this aha moment where I was like, I think if like this is going to happen in the world, like I need to build it. Otherwise nobody's going to sort of build it. And thankfully Founders Fund is a platform and a investment firm that is pretty pro sort of doing this.
Pro founders starting things at
exactly,
their fund.
Exactly.
Yeah, it goes in the name.
Goes in the name. That's what I always say. People always ask like, oh, how do you do it? And I'm like, it's in the name.
Yeah, it's pretty obvious.
It was the whole goal of this. But yeah, way back in the day, Peter Thiel basically like built Palantir, sort of like slightly before in some ways Founders Fund, but sort of in parallel with Founders Fund was building Palantir. More recently since that, Trey Stevens, one of our partners, built Anduril, obviously. Yeah. And so, in that time period, I was basically leaning on Trey a lot for like, hey, how did you sort of set this up internally? And then even since Varda, one of our other partners, Scott Nolan, started this company, General Matter.
Of course.
We had like some... at least like I wouldn't quite call it infrastructure, but at least some willingness to sort of do this. So that's a bit on like how it happened. Should people do this more? I would say I do think it's sort of very case by case specific. I think a bit of what sort of makes my sort of role work is like Founders Fund as a platform is very well established and support and is very supportive of this type of activity. But I would say that is not necessarily the case for other people that I've seen try to do this sort of same role. As an example, I think it would be very difficult for me to like do what you are doing, which is like establishing a totally net new fund. And also try to, basically work on Varda at the same time. It's
two new businesses.
Yeah, it's basically two new businesses, and both of which you're trying to like breathe life into. It's very, very difficult to like, turn something out of nothing. And like, especially in those early years, I think it would have been possible to like do something, like both of those at the same time. What's great about Founders Fund is like it's so well established, such great track record, returns, et cetera, that like I don't have to spend any time on like fundraising on behalf of the fund. I don't have to like establish the brand on behalf of the fund. I don't have to like go and start deal flow from scratch or anything like that. Like there's a lot of pre-existing basic like infrastructure, such that in some ways on the Founders Fund side of my job, I really just spend time on like the highest leverage, in some ways the most fun activities, which is just like meet with great founders and fund them. And the rest of like the back office operations, fundraising, et cetera, we have like a phenomenal, COO, Lauren Gross, that basically like handles effectively all of that. And like that is pre-existing infrastructure I'm building on top of. So I think it's, I think it's hard for people to find that like, breathing, or find a way to like, have an investor job that isn't, starting something totally from scratch, but that is also supportive of it. Like, as an example, I don't think like, Andreessen Horowitz has anybody that quite has this type of, sort of role there. I think they're pretty focused on like, if you work there, you're full time at like an Andreessen Horowitz, or like, Sequoia, basically same thing, right? I think maybe for the first time ever, Ravi over there, who's the former Instacart, exec, it seems like they're starting to potentially like experiment.
They're
with
taking
that
from your model a little bit. It
yeah,
seems.
yeah, we'll see. I mean,
who knows how involved he'll be at Sequoia still, right? It's like he might just be fully leaving, but yeah.
Yeah, like I mean, if from what I know of how Sequoia works, it requires many, many hours of time with your partners and with the team. And so,
but he's a legend, so you make exceptions.
Yeah, he is a legend. He is a legend. But I think part of what makes it work at the Founders Fund model is like we don't do Monday partner meetings. We don't have super high expectations on the team's time. It's very autonomous, sort of like, go run your own strategy and like, come together when there's a particular deal. But other than that, like, no need to come together regularly. And so it's very low time drag. And so I think it's also, again, FF is both established and also very low time drag. And so that's what allows me to, I think, basically do both jobs. I think today is a Monday, right? Yeah. I'm sure there are plenty of people that have my job in California right now. They're in the middle of like a partner meeting that takes them like 8 hours per day. I am not. I'm in New York City largely for a bunch of basically like Varda related meetings, and I can like focus on that basically all day. And there's no like Founders Fund expectation other than like I had like a 15-minute call basically like, today where we like synced up as a team, and it was basically like, nothing, sort of live, thumbs up, around the room, basically good to go. Now, I do think both jobs do have a ton of synergies, between the two. Totally. Like, on the like Founders Fund side, my ability to like rapidly assess things in the A&D space, in the biotech space, because of the work that I do at Varda, just way easier. Like I'll give one example. A couple of years ago, I met this founder, Jordan Black, who runs this company, Senra Systems. They do like basically like wire harnessing, basically assembly on behalf of a bunch of startups in large primes. Met him on a Friday at like 11 a.m. Was really enthusiastic about him, the business. Immediately basically called one of my Founders Fund partners. I was like, can you meet him in like 2 hours, basically same day? I'll have him stay in the office. And basically in between my meeting and that, call 2 hours later, immediately just called a bunch of the like executives at Varda that it turns out Jordan had either like worked closely with, or they at least connected me rapidly into people at SpaceX that he had worked with. He was ex-SpaceX. And so I was able to perform like a level of like, network diligence and reputation diligence that if you were just like a VC starting from like LinkedIn and trying to figure out like who did this guy work with, it would have been like weeks of like you're sending cold DMs, emails, et cetera. It would have been, I think, like much harder. And so on the diligence side of things, sort of much, much better. And then I think even on the like post offer, trying to convince somebody to take your offer, tons of people want to work with somebody that's like, sort of building something, basically rather than not. And then, on the founder side, there are many times where I would not necessarily be able to get a meeting with like XYZ senator that might not meet with me on like the Varda hat alone, but with the combination of the two hats, this is like interesting enough, broad enough set of topics that we can talk about that like they're willing to meet. Or like, heck, the Hill Valley Forum, right? Like I definitely largely do that in some ways under like my FF hat. I mean, in some ways at this point, it's almost like a third hat that I wear. But yeah, it's also pretty advantageous to, sort of Varda that I'm the one that's like gathering together all these elected officials, DOW officials, and, private investors and private companies. And like, I get to choose where my Varda executives sit at like the, sort of dinner, what panels they speak on, et cetera. So yeah, I find there's a lot of synergies. I wouldn't necessarily say I recommend it to many more people to do, in that like I think it's really hard to find the sweet spot where it works on both sides and it's synergistic rather than being a drag.
On Trailblazers, we spotlight founders who succeed by doing things differently, not by following the playbook, but by rewriting it. Many of those unconventional builders and the VCs backing them run on Brex because it helps them scale with speed and focus. From smart corporate cards and high-yield banking to AI-powered expense management, Brex gives startups the financial stack they need from day one so they can spend more time building and less time managing back-office operations. More than 30,000 companies, from breakout startups like Anthropic and Cursor to global leaders like DoorDash and Plaid, trust Brex to help them spend smarter and move faster. That's why we, as a venture firm and also the podcast, run on Brex too. Sign up at brex.com/trailblazerspod to get started and claim exclusive rewards. That's brex.com/TRAILBLAZERSPOD. RocketReach is the leading sales and lead intelligence solution trusted by sales, marketing, recruiting, and business development teams to grow their businesses. Whether you're looking for a developer halfway around the world, a C-level executive in New York, or a potential investor in Silicon Valley, we connect you directly. With RocketReach, you can easily access the most comprehensive, accurate compilation of emails and phone numbers on Earth. That puts you in front of the right people faster and backs you up with a database that reaches across industries, markets, and titles, using AI to continually improve the quality of your contacts. With RocketReach, you can reach anyone so you can reach higher. Many of you know I love cold outreach. It's been the root of many of my success so far, and this is the tool that I've used the whole time. Trailblazer listeners get 15% off any plan at rocketreach.co/trailblazers. That's rocketreach.co/trailblazers. Totally. No, I really appreciate that context. And I think so much of what you're saying too is making me see that like, this is really Founders Fund's thing. I know it's only been a few times, but it really makes sense for that fund. Whereas in Andreessen, as an example, like their thing is to have people actually build more of like a content engine and be more of like a media figure. And that's their like side hustle outside of being a partner. And so I think every firm actually has their own, like, we like partners that operate, or we like partners that post on social, but it's more about like finding the right fit. Speaking about posting on social, that's like a third job that you have. I feel like you have definitely built up a very original online presence. What's your relationship with like content and posting online? Is that something that you do because you know that it elevates the profile of both Varda and Founders Fund? Is it you just find it fun? What's your relationship with like content and media these days?
So back in the day, I originally worked with Keith Raboy, as his like chief of staff, and that was sort of my original venture.
At Khosla, for everyone with timeline, yeah.
Yes, back in the day at Khosla. And when I was working with him, he already had a pre-existing, basically like large like Twitter presence, media presence, et cetera. And so in some ways, there was some amount of like seeing that it provided him basically like leverage in both of his roles, both at the time at Open Door and at Khosla Ventures. And so there was at least some model of like, hey, this can clearly have value. But then also in working with Keith, I wrote this series of essays around the lessons that I learned basically by working with him that ended up sort of posting on my blog and then also publishing those on Twitter. And it was those sets of essays that really like kickstarted my like social media account. I basically went from like probably like 800 followers to I think like 10,000 followers basically over the course of like 2 months by like posting those essays. I think it was 6 total, and I basically post them like once every week or so. And that I mostly did because it was it was a wrapping up of a 2-year sort of block of time with him where I was working really closely. Wanted to kind of just like write down my learnings so I'd remember them for the rest of life. But then there started to be this like sort of fast feedback loop where I started to realize I was like, oh, like even just now with 10,000 followers, I like am seeing more interesting companies and like more interesting people are inviting me to like XYZ events, et cetera. And so I was like, this is something like I want to lean into, and I've seen like the success with Keith. So it was probably then like a maybe like 6-month time period where it was like a very active professional goal where like I literally had like an OKR for myself of like just tweet once a day, like, at least once, and like doesn't always have to be the most interesting thing, but just like something that I encountered in like, my professional life that like, I want to talk about. And then that at some point like creates this behavioral feedback loop where like you're then always sort of in this mindset of like analyzing the life that you're living and the things you're experiencing at work with like, oh, how can I make this into like an interesting quip on Twitter? And like I feel like the algorithm does a great job of like fine tuning you where like, you
learn what hits.
Yeah, what hits. Yeah. And like obviously everybody has their own style, et cetera. But like obviously almost certainly the like algorithm has pushed me towards a like style that is Delian, but is like amplified in a way that like, is, more likely to go viral on Twitter. I do find that like I've had multiple times people meet me and say, hey, like I expected based off your Twitter profile for you to be this like antagonistic, furrow-browed autist, and you're a little bit more pleasant than I expected. And so there's a part of me where I'm like, I can't tell the difference. Obviously, I think I'm just me and that I'm being me on Twitter, but it's almost certainly like, picking some portions of me that, it's, suggesting that I, sort of amplify because that's what, sort of Twitter really enjoys. At this point, I would say it's like, probably some amount of addiction, some amount of like, I'm just having like fun on there. And it's like, I don't think that like at the scale that I'm at, any bigger scale matters anymore. It's like, for the things that I'm working on, I can get the attention that I want and like, get connected to who I need. It's actually, if you look at it, I think I'm like at my probably lowest frequency of like, sort of Twitter posting ever, even though it's like the largest account that it's like basically ever been. And maybe a part of that is like, starting to get like bored of the like algorithm, continuing to, sort of feed into my brain, or maybe I'm just like happier in life too.
But you also just like have what you want from it. Like, I think so much of it is like when you see Keith do it, you're like, okay, well, I want something that has a following, and now you have enough, whatever enough is.
Yeah.
It's funny you say that when people meet you, they think that you're a little different. I feel like Keith probably has that same thing. Like he gives a very specific persona online, but actually like when you meet him or you hear him talk, he's definitely got a little bit of that spice, but it's toned down from the online persona. So maybe you copied that a little bit too.
People would always say to him when like they would meet with him, like when I was his chief of staff, they would always say like, "Oh, you're all bark and no bite."
Yeah, totally. That's how it comes across.
Kind of funny phrase.
Yeah. I want to talk to you about the Hill and Valley Forum,
Yeah.
especially because you just announced that it's coming back again, which is very exciting in March. Why start it? Why make it an event series versus another format? And tell everyone a little bit more about that vision.
Yeah. So I started it, I think I want to say 2021 with my two co-founders, Jacob Hellberg, who's now Undersecretary of State for Economic Affairs.
And Keith's husband.
And Keith's husband. Yeah, and Keith's husband.
Yep.
But yeah, very much so, obviously now in his own right. And it was, for what it's worth, it was very much so like, it was very much so like Jacob's idea, to like, start something basically like this. So Keith only later on started to like obviously attend, and obviously he's like hugely supportive. But I want to make sure that Jacob gets
his credit. Everyone,
Yeah,
no questions about it.
Yeah, exactly. And then Christian Garrett, who's another friend at partner of 137 Ventures. Jacob and Christian were like actually like having I think like a lunch or coffee in Miami, talking about hey, there should be a forum for something like this, that connects basically more of DC, Silicon Valley, especially now that there's way more like this is the very very beginnings of like the defense tech aerospace sort of like wave in 2021. And they were like, we should find somebody to help us organize this. Delian has like a great network in both of these. Why don't we like, Adam is like the third, sort of part of this. And originally just started as like, let's just like organize like, it was supposed to be like a 15, 20 person dinner in like Washington, D.C. And then even that first year, we just like started to like invite people, just like rapidly ballooned up to like an 85 person dinner with like, again, great guests across like the private, public, elected official basically side of things. And so, I just remember the three of us thinking like, whoa, there's clearly something here. So we did that. I think I want to say the first one like September 21. And they were like, let's fast follow this with something like a bit bigger, more professional, and did it in like I think March 22 basically, sort of right afterwards. And that one we did like now like 150, 200 person, like much more formal, table seatings, etc., bigger venue. And that was when we were like, okay, this is clearly like a thing. We need to now start to like really, sort of lean into this. And so then the following March 23 was when we were like, let's add now like a daytime forum agenda to it, bigger, sort of nighttime dinner. Why event format? I think, the goal of the Hill and Valley Forum was to basically increase the connective tissue between Silicon Valley and Capitol Hill in a sort of bipartisan or nonpartisan basically sort of way. And I think that type of connective tissue just really only happens via like in-person engagement. And so one of the core focuses each year of the forum is like for the dinner tables really establish very clear like themes that are like practically around a particular issue that both elected officials care about but private cares about. So for example, Congressman McCall one year came to us saying like I'm really interested in sort of modular microreactors and nuclear basically like technology, and so make sure that we established like a whole dinner table that was basically a bunch of nuclear tech sort of founders. This is way before even today, obviously like now nuclear is like a whole thing,
yeah,
but like in 2023 it was still not really that much of a thing on either elected or private side of things. And yeah, we like established a whole table around that, and like some policy actually came out of basically sort of that like dinner table conversation. But we try to do that across like 35 basically like different sort of topic areas. And I think there's just continued to be resonance across all different sort of parties that like tech companies love it because it allows them to go brief like 15 congressmen in a single evening, basically on like the technology in a much more casual setting than like having to set up like formal basically briefings like in the congressman's basically office. Elected officials seem to love it because they're like it's very bipartisan, but I admit it's pretty tech forward and centrist leaning, right? Like I don't think and again I'm always open to inviting these people. I'm not opposed to it, but I'm just for now, at least so far, I haven't seen the policy from them or interest from them of like, we haven't really invited the AOCs. We haven't invited the Marjorie Taylor Greens, like on both sides of the aisle. We've mostly kept it to folks that like are interested in actually like tech and economic, sort of policy.
More of like a libertarian vibe, it sounds like.
I mean, they're definitely like, I don't think like Ted Lieu from California would describe himself as like a libertarian, but like, yeah, he has like, El Segundo in his district. And so he cares a lot about
my
like
congressman,
aerospace.
by the way,
from
back home.
Oh, funny
enough.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, like I don't think Ted Lieu would describe himself as a libertarian, but like, yeah, he cares about technology.
It's in his backyard.
It's in his backyard, right? So it's like people like him are like to me a prototypical example of like, yeah, I don't really like care about exactly where he lands on every political issue, but I care about the fact that he cares about technology and how it influences basically sort of society. And so those are the types of people that we're trying to sort of bring around the table.
Was there a thesis around like tech folks being more involved in government over time? Because I think when you tell me this started in 21, this was before Trump was elected. This was before the whole Doge thing and before like the David Sachs and the Shahram Andreessen and all those folks like entered. I mean, even Joe at Airbnb entered government.
Totally.
Was there a thesis at all in this discussion of starting it? Like, we actually think there will have to be a convergence, or was it very much just like, Wow, that worked in our favor.
Yeah, no, I think it's one of these things, just like companies in some ways, like probably 50% is in your own control, 50% is like macro market stuff. I think like a lot of why the Hill and Valley Forum is having success now is just these insane macro tailwinds, basically. And so a lot of times I feel like I'm like, oh my God, it takes like a decent amount of effort and like logistics, et cetera. And thankfully at this point, it's an official 501c3. We have like funding. There's like full-time executive director on staff, like a ton of support, sort of infrastructure. But there are so many times where I just want to be like, I don't want to fucking work on this thing anymore. It's just like, yes, is valuable in some ways. In other ways, it's just like, this takes a lot of time to plan like a really big event, basically, sort of once a year. But I kind of come back to it where I'm like, it's become this default venue. Like, I feel this like moral responsibility for the fact that like it is experiencing these tailwinds. And so like, at some point I hope to spend basically less time on it. But until then, I will keep making sure that it just like keeps being able to raise funding, gets more staff, et cetera. And then at some point I hope that it like can like entirely live on its own without the Delian support and influence, et cetera. But probably still a few more years away from that. But I can see the, light at the end of the tunnel where, I want the Hill and Valley Forum to live entirely, basically on its own. But no, definitely was not as a part of the thesis. I think, in some ways, like, caught a huge, sort of lucky break, and then feel very grateful. For example, like, sort of last summer when the administration was looking to do a, sort of summit around AI, they basically called, obviously David, since he's a part of the administration, and David calling us to do this like joint, all-in summit, Hill and Valley basically forum to really like, talk about AI specifically. And this year already have some like phenomenal, I don't think we've released anything on the elected official side, but you can imagine lots of really great elected officials. But on the private side, it's everything from like Shyam Sankar at Palantir, Eric Lyman from Rand, but also folks like Vinod Khosla, who, as you can imagine, is like very different than the current administration's political leanings. But we've always tried to make sure that like the speakers and like the attendees are pretty, sort of evenly distributed on both sides.
There's not many places you can go now where you do get both sides of the conversation, other than like a Twitter,
Totally.
honestly. Like I think of like there was a Vinod thing this past week, and you get his side and then you get Keith's side and you get, it's healthy actually. And so I think it's cool to have like an IRL version where those two worlds can come together.
Yeah, and I think like a part of why the elected officials like it is like they don't always have an obvious place to interact with the like other side of the aisle that has more similar leanings to them than like they probably appreciate. And so we've even heard from elected officials, they're like, yeah, like it's just really hard for me to like run into these people. I can't really do one-on-ones with them because it's just like weird for, from opposite parties to like do that unless there's like explicitly something. So I only see them in subcommittee hearings, but we're like yelling at each other in those because we're like, in a public setting where in theory things are being filmed. And so we need to appear adversarial versus this like, private off the record setting. We can actually like sit down, chat at dinner. And it turns out like there's been several like, co-sponsored legislation that have come out of basically like folks that just like met at a Hill and Valley forum, because it's like we've been told that like other than like the State of the Union, it's like the time where like a significant chunk of like these legislators actually get together for like sort of a dinner rather than like fly in, fly out, nonstop, basically booked meetings basically all day, and it's really easy for them to like never actually even like see people on the other side of the aisle other than just like on the floor of Congress and voting against each other, basically.
I think that's also like, a big misconception of it is that people think that they're like, they all see each other all the time, but they're actually like kind of tucked away doing their work. If you work in venture or startups, you know the constant juggling act. Replying to messages from co-investors, founders, LPs, customers, and teammates all hitting your personal number. I know this very well. We all hand out our cell, which means your EA can't help an iMessage, and important threads get buried. That's why I'm very excited about Quo, formerly OpenPhone. It's built for founders and investors like us who want communication that feels personal but stays organized. Quo gives you a dedicated business line on your existing cell phone. And if you already have a business number, you can bring it with you for free. Plus, you'll get call summaries, transcripts, and an AI voice agent called Sona that can answer and schedule when you're offline. We're actually cooking up something fun with the Quo team right now and using that same voice AI tech in a new way for our firm. More soon, but it's a great reminder that you can use voice AI to stay top of mind of your customers' needs. Quo is trusted by over 90,000 businesses and rated #1 on G2 for customer satisfaction. You can get 20% off your first 3 months at quo.com/trailblazers. That's quo.com/trailblazers. So I've actually used Gusto at 3 different companies, and every time it's been such a relief. It's simple, it's reliable, and my paycheck was always on time, no drama. And unlike the big clunky payroll systems out there, Gusto is online payroll and benefit software specifically built for small businesses. It's all-in-one, remote-friendly, and incredibly easy to use, so you can pay, hire, onboard, and support your team from anywhere. For smaller startups in particular, I have found that it's the most affordable and easy to set up option, and it's the one that we recommend to all of our startups at our firm. Try Gusto today at gusto.com/trailblazers and get 3 months free when you run your first payroll. That's 3 months of free payroll at gusto.com/trailblazers. One more time, gusto.com/trailblazers. Okay, I want to do a lightning round quickly with you.
Yeah.
I could keep asking you questions, but I know we don't have all day. Let me know the first thing that comes to mind.
Sure.
Okay? Book in hand or podcast in ears?
Book in hand.
Okay, a favorite that you have?
I've been reading this book right now by this guy, Frank Wilczek, called A Beautiful Question, which is about sort of like the history of our understanding of the universe from like, he's obviously a physicist, so really like in our, sort of growth and understanding of like physics in the universe, but he ties it back to just like, beauty and, harmony and, in some ways, how the world is so beautiful based off of the like, sort of physical laws that, sort of govern it. And so I really like it because it has this like sort of half sort of spiritual beauty component, half very like, objective physics and scientific, sort of component.
Sounds like a very you book.
Yeah.
Combining a lot of your interests in one. It's like psychology, people, philosophy, space. I have a Broadway show for you if you ever do Broadway and come back. In a few months, Daniel Radcliffe is in a show called Every Beautiful Thing or something like that.
Okay.
With kind of a similar undertone.
No way.
So if you like the book,
cool.
I have a rec for you
like
when
Daniel
you're ready.
Radcliffe, so
He's great.
Yeah.
He can't go wrong. Okay, morning person or night owl?
Definitely night owl. Like my most productive hours are like 8 to 10 p.m. at night.
Okay. I'm actually similar. Cooking dinner or ordering in?
Definitely cooking dinner when I can.
What's your signature dish?
Oh man, I definitely just like my various Bulgarian dishes that I sort of make, and so it's probably like our most famous salad. It's called shopska salad. It's like a shepherd's salad that has like feta cheese, tomato, cucumbers, red onions, roasted peppers. It's very, very good.
It's like a Greek salad with roasted peppers. It sounds like.
Yeah, similar. And
Any meat?
And I don't think red onions are typically in a Greek salad either.
Oh, okay. I put them in my Greek salad.
Okay,
I guess I do it wrong.
Yeah.
Awesome. VC or bootstrapping?
I'm very biased towards like, I think your ability to consume and deploy capital reflects how much like impact you're able to have on the world, and I want to optimize for impact, and so capital happens to be the way to measure that. So yeah, VC.
Love it. I would have guessed that you'd say that answer. Networking dinner or big conference?
Oh gosh,
just off the heels of Hill and Valley Forum, you gotta say big conference. I don't know.
Neither ideally, but yeah, I guess more prone to the smaller dinners. Although I admit, like last year at Hill and Valley Forum was the first time ever where like the bones in my hand got bruised because like I think I shook like 700 hands that day, roughly was my estimate. The most I've ever shook in one day. So really credit to politicians that go on like multi-month long basically like road shows. I don't know how the heck they do it. I did one day of that and I was like, I can't do this.
I think of like Prince William and Princess Kate or whatever, who like actually shake like 1,000 hands like every day.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like they're the ones who are like the most prone to that. They need like gloves or something. Hire slow or fire fast?
At Varda, at least we've taken the approach of like hire slow. Like we like have had very few firings and very few churns. Now that sometimes has impacted our ability to like, if you look at our LinkedIn headcount growth rate, it's not like crazy up and to the right. But also if you look at like the first 30 people that joined Varda, it's something like probably 25 of them are still there now, like 5 years later. And it's probably, 1 or 2 people that had huge life changes where they needed to go and like 1 or 2 fires, and that's about it.
Don't you feel like that's a really strong signal, like retention of the early employees? Is that something that you look at when you're thinking about investing or speaking to new teams? I
think different cultures can work. I think it's worked very well, sort of for Varda. There's obviously plenty of companies that have had success with like, Ramp, for example, is much more, I think, on like the, sort of fire fast side of things. So it's not to say you can't build massive companies, but at least at Varda, it's something, especially with like the extreme long-term nature of the type of like projects that we're taking on. It's not to say Ramp isn't long-term, but you can make more day-to-day progress in the software land versus in hardware. It's like, you kind of can't make progress other than over the course of like a 2-year window, basically, to take something from scratch and actually ship it to space. And so,
and the sales cycles are so long. I mean, it's a whole different, and the depth of expertise is so different.
Yeah. We have like folks that joined us when they were like interns and undergrad in year 1. They're now like 5 years out of school, still at Varda. Their entire like career, everything that they know about being in the professional world is Varda. But it's also extremely helpful having these people on board because even like they're like 25, 26. For somebody that's coming in that's maybe mid-stage career but only fresh into Varda, the 25, 26-year-old has like actually way more moral authority, understanding, like just like so much of the culture is imbued into them of just like they have seen everything that Varda's gone through, and so they just have so much more context. Yeah, that's epic. You definitely want to back whatever they start next. That person that's been there 0 to 1. Totally. Wow. Amazing. 10 small wins or 1 big moonshot? Definitely the 1 big moonshot. I bide my time on the like company building and investing side of things and just like take a handful of big swings per year. Yeah. Well, that's how we make money, so we're a little biased. Yeah. Being early or being right? I think I enjoy the being right a lot more than being early. So I'll come late into something, but as long as I get to be right.
Love it. Never post on socials again or never fundraise another dollar again?
Definitely the never post on socials. I'd be okay just like retiring from socials at this point and just like focus on like.
You can't even be a reply guy. Yeah. Like you're just like nothing. You're good with that?
Yeah. Do the Peter Thiel approach.
Yeah.
Just have this
right off into the sunset.
Nothing on it.
Yeah, totally. AI overhyped or underhyped?
I think probably like overhyped financially and underhyped like societal impact wise.
Okay. Is there anything right now that is in the AI world, which is basically everything that you're really excited about, that maybe not everyone's talking about, that is more underhyped?
I think we are just in the early innings of seeing how some of these technologies can actually impact the workflows of companies that like do things in the real world. Like, AI is obviously doing a ton for people in software, and I think you're starting to see AI do things for atoms-based companies, and whether that's like things like obviously like drug discovery, where it's been doing some things for a while, to like starting to see this is obviously one very particular and more academic example, but NASA just showed that they took their Perseverance rover, which is on the surface of Mars, and for the first time ever, they actually did like about a half a kilometer navigation where they entirely had Claude Code basically navigate the entire time. And so that I think is like incredibly fascinating because normally it's like a team of like 20 people in mission control reviewing live data, et cetera, and instead that was entirely done via AI. So now all of a sudden you can have like rovers on Mars that are basically just driving themselves 24/7, way above what the budgets of like NASA can afford in terms of like permanently staffed mission control.
Very exciting. I feel like every day I see a new post that's like, we now did this thing with Claude Code. Like it started with like YC coding most of their startups, like 80% plus is using Claude Code or Cursor. And then every day there's like a new aha. And so to see where that goes is exciting.
Yeah, I admit, I'm probably a little underslept yesterday because my brother finally got me hooked into sort of Claude Code and found a use case around it where I was in a friend's office that has a 3D printer, and then he was showing me that I can use Claude Code to actually like help me do faster, basically like iterations on like some of the 3D models that I wanted to print. That it was way faster than me doing it by hand in CAD. I knew Claude Code could help with like typing out lines of code. Did not realize it was at the point where it could actually like manipulate like 3D files. And so yeah, I spent like probably 6 hours yesterday with Claude Code fucking around.
That's epic. That's so awesome. Was there like any outcome that you were like, oh wow, I can't believe I did this, or was it more just like tinkering and figuring it out?
I basically made like 3 gifts basically for like various like friends, including like my brother. The first 2 I'm very happy with how they came out with. The third, which I spent the most time on, was the most complex. I think I got a little too overambitious, and so things went a little haywire, and so unfortunately that project did not get completed. But next weekend.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's only gonna get better. That's the beauty. These models only get easier and better.
That's basically what my brother told me because I was explaining how frustrated I was with the model, and he was like, just wait for the next model to come out. Like the issue that you're having, it'll be smarter by then.
It's crazy, and how quickly those models come out. You're like, oh, okay, I need another month, and then in a week you're like, oh, I can do it now.
Yeah, exactly.
Delian, thank you for being here. This was so fun.
Thanks so much for having me.
I appreciate it. Where can people find you and Varda and Founders Fund and all that good stuff?
Probably all easiest on my Twitter at Zebulgar, Zebulgar.
Amazing. Thanks for being here.
Thanks so much for having me.
On Trailblazers, we're always talking about multiplying your impact, and that's exactly what Athena helps you do. Athena pairs you with a world-class executive assistant who becomes a true force multiplier for your business and your life. Working with my Athena assistant has been transformative. Gab was instrumental in raising Park Rangers Capital's fund in ways that I could have never imagined an assistant could contribute. From closing 6-figure checks, to identifying new LPs we should meet, to matching my tone perfectly in follow-up emails. He's elevated my capacity as a founder by giving me more time to focus on the highest leverage work. Athena isn't just about scheduling meetings, it's about unlocking leverage. Hundreds of founders, investors, and executives trust Athena to free their time and scale their impact. Athena is offering our listeners $2,000 off for their first year of service and priority onboarding. And you want that, trust me, there's a very long wait list. When you're ready to multiply your impact and free up time for the things only you can do, go to athenago.me/Erica-Wenger. That's athenago.me/ERICA-WENGER. Thanks so much for listening to the Trailblazers podcast. If you enjoyed this conversation, be sure to follow the show so you never miss an episode. You can also support our work by sharing it with a friend or leaving a quick review. It helps more contrarian builders find us. For more on Park Rangers Capital and our community of elephant founders, head to parkrangerscap.com or find me online at Erica_Wenger. Until next time, keep trailblazing.